Hey folks, greetings from the Offensive Security Group here at Secure IT 360, coming at you with another episode of the Cyber Threat Perspective. Today I have none other than Mark Brophy, excuse me, I can't word very good, Mark Brophy on the podcast today. Mark leads up our incident response team at Secure IT 360. So we are talking about what to do minute one when incident response arrives. So in this episode, we're going to dive into kind of what you should do and maybe not do, the second that the incident response team arrives, when you need when you need that support. We know that, the first minutes matter, and Mark will go into this some more, but whether it's a ransomware attack or something else, time is of the essence. But also making the right calls and taking the right steps is also really important. So what this episode is all about is kind of the do's and don'ts, some of the common mistakes that Mark sees, and from his experience responding to many, many incidents, how you can kind of mitigate some of those mistakes early on by just being a little bit more informed about the process and how it works. So, Mark, welcome to the podcast again. Why don't you start with just a brief background of who you are and what you do, what your experience is, and that kind of thing, to give the listeners some background on you. And then also I'd like you to share kind of the inspiration for this episode, because I think it's kind of unique. It's a unique angle to talking about incident response. So have at it.
Yeah, absolutely. So been in the IT/security field for over 20 years now. I started back in 2001. Back with Gateway Computers, back when they were a thing. Been up through the ranks of engineering and IT management, different organizations of different sizes, from small not-for-profits all the way to largest employer in the state. And along the way, really focused in on security. Numerous, I think up to like 24 security certifications from the usual cast of characters from ISACA, ISC2, SANS, CompTIA, and the like. On the side, so my day job, I lead the incident response team here at Security 360. There's myself, and then we have a lead forensics individual. But on the side, I also teach at local universities, teaching in their cyber programs, trying to get the next generation of talent, cyber talent ready for the workforce, ready. I keep saying someday, in the future, I'd like to retire, and I'd like to know that, the future's in good hands. And sometimes we feel like we're losing the war. The fact that the threats keep emerging quicker and faster, and trying to get people skilled up, ready to handle the battle. I'd like to we're training more Jedi than stormtroopers. So
I like it.
Yeah. So the idea over the last about this idea was, what we've seen, with different organizations, and this may be geared more towards small and mid-sized companies, because obviously if you've got budget for security, you're a larger size organization, you're more mature, you may have gone through drills and exercises and prepared yourself. But we're now seeing the shift in the threat actors that they're attacking everybody, right? They're just not going after the big whales. They're going after smaller companies to ransomware them or do extortion. And smaller companies who may have been able to hide in the weeds are now fully exposed. So with that, you may have people working in the IT field who are now facing new challenges, things that they've read about, but now they've never really experienced it firsthand. And sometimes the initial reaction to something can really set the stage as far as how well your company survives the incident, but also the general questions are going to have to be asked, and mishandling or misstepping on the first few moments could really have repercussions down the line when forensics teams get involved. Say, because ultimately management wants to have answers, and if information was trampled on or mishandled or no longer there, then we can't give answers, and then that opens a whole nother set of questions that management may have to take up with legal. Right? The more information we can get, the more we can speak the truth.
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing I think that's important to kind of cover that you've got in here is when an IR kicks off, what are the very first things responders should focus on identifying? So when an incident response kicks off, let's say you've initiated the team, right? Like you've called in the support. What are the first things responders should focus on identifying?
So usually by now, if my team's been engaged, the IT team may have uncovered something, or at least it has enough evidence to feel that there's something here that's more than just a figment of imagination. And a lot of times while we're coming in, um, the IT teams that are on site, they may feel compelled to rush. Look, I got to do something. I got to do something, and that anxiety or that pressure, can sometimes be disadvantage, or could actually hamper things. Really a story when I was before I got into IT. I was a police officer up in New York State, and when I was going through the police academy, it was the week they were teaching us about what to do in certain specialized incidents, and one was handling a bomb threat. And they had brought in this retired lieutenant from NYPD. Of course, you imagine they handle bomb scares and situations. They have bomb disposal teams at the ready. So this very gregarious instructor came in, and he's going around the room and saying, "Hey, you got to notice if something's wrong and something's suspicious. What do you do?" And first person responding was saying, "Well, I think maybe we should analyze it closer. Or I think we should open it up. Or we should do this." And in his best Sam Kinison impersonation, he said, "Don't touch it. Right? Let the experts come in. The best you can do is try to contain, keep distance, keep people out of the way, and let the experts come in, and they will tell you what to do." So that always kind of stuck with me when I was in the field as a network admin. If I saw something, I always took pause, wanted to make sure whatever I was doing, and then take a step back. So that would be
So what are some of the things that an organization should and shouldn't do? Like, so when they're responding, right, and they're trying to contain and they're waiting for the IR team to get there, right? Pulling the network plug, I presume, is an okay thing, or maybe like network quarantine, right, from your EDR. But like, what other things can organizations do in the interim that's not going to disrupt evidence or like hamper the process? And then what are some things that they should definitely not do?
Yeah. So obviously the easiest thing, depending on the system, we're talking old school on-premise servers, right? Let's say you get something suspicious. Absolutely, you can go to layer one and unplug the cable, right? Or disable the NIC, go into the switch port and down the interface. Isolate that device, because the concern there is perhaps whatever's on the device may spread. Going back to the days of like the slammer virus and all those guys way back when, the worms at the network. So you may look at trying to quarantine. Depending on how your network's laid out, you may not have that granularity. You may have to take an entire switch down and therefore everything connected to it. This is, that's where some planning and thought ahead of time as far as what if. Of course, know your capabilities. If you do have an EDR product that has the network containment, those products are designed to do just that, to just enhance the firewalls to such a point of the device that it can't communicate further. But beyond that, really the thing to do is to stand still, wait until direction gets in, because questions are going to arise when we come in. It's like, who accessed the server, who touched it, who did this? If we see remote assistance tool fired up on the box, was this IT that came in was doing work, or do we happen to catch the bad guy on the way out? So it's things of that where we can truly say nobody's touched it. We can then start going into our next steps of investigation along those lines. And then beyond that, if you have devices that you're if you got your logs being streamed, try to get them ready for analysis or export out. But then again, I would still wait for guidance, on the team. The first part really is to kind of sit tight and do no further harm. Don't try to contain without that getting widespread.
Yeah, and you touched on something that I want to dig into more, and that is the communication aspects of it. You mentioned, when the IR team comes in, they're going to have a bunch of questions, right? And those are questions that you may have the answers for right away, and those are questions that IR team might have to help answer, or you might have to help them answer. There are many paths to the communication that happens during an incident, right? So maybe if you could share a little bit on communication and what good communication looks like when an IR team first gets there, right? Like with an emphasis on, like, when we first get there, what are the things that we need to communicate to them? What are the things that we can maybe prepare ahead of time so that the communication is a little bit easier, more streamlined, or straightforward when IR has to come in. So help us walk through like internal communication, what it looks like in those first moments, and what are some of like the do's and don'ts for communication, especially early on in like the beginning of an incident.
So there should be defined roles, right? If someone is going to be the hands on the keyboard doing the isolation or doing the containment, they should not be the one picking up the phones talking to people. Now, again, I understand in small organizations, if you're only one or two IT people, you're kind of it. But you should enlist somebody, another member of the management team or someone else who can sit there and just start taking notes. Start collecting the who, what, when, and where, because we want facts. We want to know facts of the situation, get the facts. The more accurate timeline we can get, the quicker we can put facts to paper in that moment, the greater likelihood we're going to capture facts and not miss something. Because if we decide that, okay, we're all going to get on Teams call in the next hour and an hour comes by, there might have been might have gotten overlooked or missed in the notes. And then they debrief my team and they're like, oh, well, we forgot about this piece, which would help on our investigation down the road, right? So this goes into the slow down, make good notes. Even it doesn't have to be one note or a PowerPoint presentation. Just grab a scratch piece of paper, start writing down who, what, when, where, timelines, and then making sure that there's a single person doing communication. If you happen to have multiple tasks and multiple team members perform those tasks, make sure that communication is going back to that single person, so people aren't talking over each other or presuming, well, Jimmy said he was doing this, I think he's done. And Jimmy said, well, I think Johnny was doing that, I think he's done. You find out Jimmy nor Johnny have done what they're doing. And then we got three stooges, right? We're running around in circles. Let each person do their task and come back, and then wait for the next assignment.
Yeah, and you mentioned something that I think is important is knowing who's doing the work and when they're doing the work, how they're doing the work, those kinds of things. And you mentioned something in the notes and in documentation that you provided before this episode, and it reminds me of that going rogue type of aspect, right? So when you're in an incident and you have somebody that's kind of going and trying to fix things without kind of communicating it across the team or up the chains, if you will. Do you have any stories or do you have any advice for those organizations where that has happened or that is happening kind of thing, or kind of some things to look out for to help prevent that from happening?
Yeah, the thing that unfortunately I have seen IT respond and get to the point where they've made an investigation almost impractical. Like, we could go forth and we can contain and help the company, but the actions of the IT team actually were detrimental to the investigation. So the challenges when people respond, of course, talking about human nature and anxieties, or just that sense of maybe IT guy feels snubbed that someone got on his network and he's going to go down there. That's when you get emotional, and then that's where the conspiracy theories start coming in. I had one company call me and saying, "We've got a user, he's been compromised," and I'm like, "What are you seeing?" As well, his mouse is moving on his screen all by himself, and he swears there's no one in his house, and he's all by himself. And I said, "Okay, do me a favor, unplug the Logitech dongle that he has plugged in." "Well, how do you know he's using a lot?" "Just trust me. Laptop users at home, he's probably got a wireless keyboard and mouse." Unplugs it, the mouse stopped moving. Yeah, right. So it was one of those, somebody saw one thing and then they injected their own bias, their own thoughts, and it went from the mouse is moving, that I am target number one of the Chinese National Army, right? They're coming after me. Like, or let's slow down and let's look at the facts, right? And that's really important. And that's why I say taking notes is we need to have the facts and stop chasing theories, right? Investigators, we follow facts. Now, facts may tell a story, but we don't have stories and find facts to back up our story, right? That's what social media does.
Yeah, and I definitely empathize, because I know it's obviously difficult, right, to have a team come in and to trust them to kind of help you figure things out. You kind of fight the urge, like you said, to kind of help out, and in doing so, you can cause more trouble or cause more problems than you initially began with. So there is a certain amount of faith and trust that you're putting into these teams, especially like a third party that comes in to help. But it is really important that if you have an engagement, you brought them on board, trust them to do the work. Obviously, you want to have oversight, make sure they're doing a good job, and make sure they're being thorough. But at some point, you do have to trust them to do the work.
Yeah, we don't work in a vacuum. We don't come in like the Men in Black, and you don't get any answers. A lot of times, my team is coming in. We're going to be working with you and giving you tasks to perform. So you're going to be in the know, right? If you really want to work an incident, we'll put you to work, but you're going to follow our lead, our instructions, because we're the ones that brought in to do this. Ultimately, we're the ones that may have to explain to other parties what happened. And we'll be mad at faculty that if, an IT member mishandled something, that's just the way it is. But we're not here to point blame. We're not here to throw people under the bus. We're not, the Bobs from Office Space. We will absolutely work with the teams to get together because it's to our win-win advantage, right? The IT teams have the intimate knowledge of the environment. They know the users, some small organizations, so that they can quickly get us information. But we also need facts. We don't need the fact that, Jerry's a clicker and he goes to every website every other day and he clicks on all stuff, right? I need the facts. What's Jerry's computer name? When we see the incident, what can we correlate any things around that, and try to build a case off of facts, right? So again, we won't work without you, but it's important that we give instructions and guidance, and if we put some guardrails on what we tell you to do, it's not that we don't trust you, is that we have your company's best interest at heart. And we're trying to make sure that everything comes out with the best possible scenario. We're doing this based on our history.
Now, what about executives, leadership, or just employees or staff kind of getting in the way of the IR process? Maybe it's leadership that wants to know what's going on at every single moment of every single minute of the incident. Walk us through kind of what that looks like in practice of how can leadership kind of get in the way too much, and what is the recommendation that you have for kind of leadership or executives kind of helping with the engagement? How can they help with the incident, and what are the things that can kind of hamper the response?
Yeah, so this is where organizations different size. I mentioned earlier there should be a single person collecting information. There should also be someone whose sole purpose is just to communicate. And that person, again, if IT doesn't have the resources, and maybe there's a manager in another department, and their whole job is you give them the needed information and tell everyone, communicate out. Look, IT is busy. Go talk to Joey, right? Joey's the person you need to talk to. Let Joey be the buffer and keep stuff up, because you can either focus your skill at hand or your task at hand and execute, or you pick up the phone and talk to people, right? And having the phone blow off the hook, people wondering when are the internet going to back up? Trust me, IT knows and they're working on it. And they don't need the "are we there yet? Are we there yet?" Coming at them. So this is where good communication can buffer that. We're going out to the organization and saying, we're aware of something. As soon as we have information to share, we will do so. Thank you very much. And organizations that have really excelled at this have gone top down, where management, they're immediately made aware of something, of a cyber incident, and then usually the communication will come from them. Of course, higher up the mountain, the voice, the more the impact to the people, right?
Yeah. And speaking of leadership, incident commanders. I want to touch on that for a minute, because I think that's a really integral part of this process, is having somebody that is experienced and kind of knows what to do and can kind of lead people through an incident. So what is the role of that IR commander, that incident commander, and how can they kind of best orchestrate things during an incident? And what are some of the qualities or characteristics of a good incident commander?
Yeah, so I often equate incident commander to being the fire chief on the scene, right? They may not be the ones actually running in the building, but they know where the different firefighters are going in, what equipment they're taking in, what their mission is when they go in, what their tasks. Same side, they're working with the outside, the perimeter, the quarantine, containment, making sure that everything's in place so nothing spreads, nothing gets any worse than it is. They may be invoking, being the point of contact for the communications persons so they can send communications out to people. But as far as skills, it really needs someone who obviously, I hate the term multitask, because humans by definition, you can't. But you need to be able to keep track of the different tasks and keep them front of mind and prioritized and stay on top of them. You need also someone who can obviously communicate to the communicators, someone who can make the directions to the firefighters or the responders or forensics very clear, but also someone who can come on the scene and, you know, calm everybody down, because again, management may be in there, they're all nervous, concerned because business is halted. They may have a million questions. IT may have a million questions. Everyone else has a million questions. And that person who can just kind of come in and say, okay, we're going to handle this. We're going to get through this. We're going to go through this and keep everyone updated so management can be involved and make decisions when management needs to. And IT can do the tasks they need to when they need to. And, you know, we'll move this through very methodically. Right? We just don't want to be shooting from the hip.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things I also wanted to cover too in the last like 10 minutes or so that we have is some best practices. And you've got a number of best practices in the document that you shared. And I wanted to walk through some of those as like, how do we kind of prepare for an incident kind of thing? So how can, based on your experience and the incidents that you've done, what are some ways that organizations can kind of tactically better prepare for an incident before it happens?
So the default answer of everything is usually, you know, do a tabletop. But if you're a smaller organization and you don't have the resources to host a tabletop, or you can't get everyone together because you're constrained on that, then as an individual IT person in charge of a network or that, I would just sit down there and start documenting and asking myself, what if? What if this account got compromised? What's the best way could I, you know, contain that? What if this happens? And just start writing stuff down, what ifs, and documenting these what ifs. You know, the very first step. Right? You don't need to say if when a password gets compromised that immediately call the FBI. No, your first step should be notify the user, password reset, MFA, etc. So just start doing these what ifs. And I think even if you don't have dedicated meetings, just periodically, you know, a couple times throughout the week or, you know, throughout the year, just stopping, reviewing your notes and saying, okay, what if this happens? And then thinking, okay, if I needed to pull the logs off of the system, if IR shows up and says, I need logs from the system, or if I got asked this question, was data access, could I answer that? And some of these are going to be very quickly defining yes or no. And that should lead you into like, okay, if yes, what do I need to do that? You know, and I can document that. Or no, okay, I got a blind spot here. So when IR shows up and they ask me for this, I know, yeah, unfortunately we don't have monitoring around that. You know, I get a lot of people ask me, can you tell us X or Y? And it's kind of like, you know, if monitoring and alerting wasn't set up on the front end, there's really not we're going to be able to capture it on the back end, right? As far as, especially when it comes to like data access on file servers and such. You know, so one question people always ask is, what was accessed? It's like, well, if you really didn't have the logging and auditing turned on the front end,
yep,
there's not a whole lot we can do on the back end, you know.
How often should teams kind of train or go through their playbooks or like do tabletops? Like, what is a good frequency for people to kind of go through that process? Because I feel like for backups, you know, in like disaster recovery, you know, I feel like an annual DR test makes sense for a lot of firms, for a lot of organizations, depending on the size. But when it comes to like IR, what is a good frequency, do you think, for people to be practicing their response playbooks or going through scenarios and kind of playing those out?
You know, that does kind of just, depend on the organization. If you got an organization that's kind of got diverse business groups, getting them together more frequently may have value because of walking through the different steps. But if you're smaller, a little more flat of an organization, you know, you may not need to do them as frequently, just because you're, you know, once you've documented the few things that you're going to do in containment, that might be it. You may not have, you know, dozens and dozens of systems or different data centers or cloud infrastructure to factor into the mix. So I will say that one of our current clients that we work with quite a bit, they do at least a monthly meeting. Sometimes it's twice a month, And all they do is they just pick one scenario and they pull out their IR book and we just talk it out. We talk about what do we do, what are capable of, and these are the questions come out. Okay, if this happens, and Mark and his team ask for information, can we get that? And then the developers or the IT staff come back and say, yes, we can. And this is where not only yes we can, but here's where that data is located, right? Because it never fails the time that you need your SME. He's on a plane to Australia and out of pocket for 22 hours, right? When I need information today. So capture that information. So in the future, when your SME is enjoying his vacation and the IR happens, the company can go to the notes and say, oh, well, he said it was over here, and we have someone who's got the access to go over and hey, lo and behold, here's the information we need, right? So.
Yep. One of the things I like too is, and I've recommended this in the past, is going to resources like the DFIR report or even pen test reports and going through the process of trying to identify, okay, if the pen tester did this or the threat actor tried to do this, is this something that we would detect? How would we respond in that situation? Like if we got this alert that said this thing was happening, what's our response to that? How would we respond? What would be the protocol for addressing that issue as it comes up? And I think that's a good way to kind of drill and train and go through your incident response playbooks and your process to try and flush some of that stuff out. Because as you know, Mark, and I'm sure you see this all the time, you sometimes don't know or you don't have an idea of all the nuances of a certain process or implementing a certain control or a mitigation or containing something unless you've gone through it before. So I think there's a lot of maybe hidden nuances to that process that this exercise can kind of help with, right?
Yeah. So again, I'm going to say this kind of depends on the organization. I mean, obviously, just like anything in life, the more you're rehearsed, the more you happen, the better prepared you are. Right? We had fire drills in schools. Small organizations, we may only want to or have the bandwidth to just do a couple things. And I can see easily where you've got smaller IT staff, one or two people who are already probably overloaded. Getting into too many details, can be, just as harmful as not doing enough. The fact that this may actually fuel the imagination where, hey, I read China is doing this, it must be happening to me. So I truly think, I guess the bottom line is companies, the IT staff, just need to have an honest chat with themselves and say, where are we on this? Are we at the very beginning where we just want to do the basics, or hey, we've got that down. Now we're ready to go a little bit further, right? And everyone's got their own little maturity level or model where they are, and there's obviously resources out there. As you had some excellent resources, but same token is after you read too many DFI reports, you start thinking that every time your mouse moves on your screen, it must be China, right? That it fuels that anxiety or fuels that imagination that perhaps it's there, But
maybe a little bit too much paranoia. I mean, a healthy dose of paranoia is obviously pretty good in cybersecurity. But I think to your point, you can go too far and think everything is a 5-alarm fire kind of thing, and to the detriment of maybe your team. So, I don't know how, but like you're all blurry now.
I've had this issue with my camera. I've used different cameras. I don't know now. I used to blame Teams, but I can't because it happened to me on Zoom. And
it's funny. It's like it can't discern. It's like the blurred background, but I can't determine your face from the wall.
Yeah, so I've had this issue now with this laptop. I mean, and again, I've changed cameras. I used to blame Teams religiously. Now I have to apologize, which kind of I have to grit my teeth. Apologize for Teams because it started happening with Zoom, happening with your podcast. So I don't know.
Yeah, these autofocuses on some of these web cameras are they're obviously not super high tech. But last thing I want to talk about was what do you do after an incident, right? After you've gone through an incident, you're kind of all the pieces are picked up, so to speak, and then it's like day one, week one, month one after you've kind of recovered and things are back to quote unquote normal. What do you do then?
Well, again, large organizations probably already have an IR plan, and then there's an after action review where there'll be a complete debriefing of the who, what, when, where, what happened, how do they respond, and look for areas of improvement. Small organizations, should do that absolutely. They may have been making changes on the fly in order to address the containment or address the situation. Whether you do it, formally, informally, you at least need to go back and say, okay, what do we do right? What do we do wrong? And how can we keep this from happening again? And those are the conversations that you need to have both internally, but also with management. Again, smaller teams may not have that documented as a step in the process, and they get pulled back into the daily grind, but they really do need to take the time to review everything and find a better path forward so this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, the cliche saying of the time to have the plan is before you enter the woods kind of thing, or, before you get punched in the mouth, the Mike Tyson quote, that kind of thing. So I think that's a really important aspect of this and an important takeaway. Awesome. Anything else that we didn't touch on that you wanted to hopefully touch on? I know there's a lot there. There's a lot in your notes, and I think it would be a great blog post, by the way, as well, or just an extended discussion. So part one of this is if you're listening to this, listeners, and you enjoy this kind of instant response, digital forensic type of conversation discussions, let us know, and we can have Mark on the podcast more. We can talk about different things related to IR, DFIR. So let us know in the comments or on social media or whatever. Let us know if you want to have Mark back on and talk more about incident response, and we would love to do that. And then second part is, Mark, anything else that you wanted to drive home or just kind of relay a message to those listening about incident response?
Yeah, the more you can talk about it, the more you can talk about it, whether it's, formal meetings or if you've got a IT partner that you're working with, start talking about hey, if the phone rings, what do we do? How do we get things going? The more you can get that talk, on the front end. I talked earlier about people getting caught up in the moment and the anxiety and maybe rushing in and doing things and touching things that they shouldn't. The more you talk about the front end, I've seen personally that it tends to calm things down and set everyone up for a better outcome. Again, usually when my team's called, introductions are made, I'm meeting people on probably the worst day of their career. And I would like to start meeting people on a more happier note. But the teams that have already had conversations with business partners and the like, as far as what ifs, tend to be more readily able to weather the first few minutes better than people who just got dropped in.
Yeah. Good advice. Good advice. So that's our episode. Mark, thank you for coming on, even though you're blurry now and I can't see your face. I can see you smiling, which is great. Silly cameras. So for those of you listening, if you got this far, we super appreciate you listening. Like I said, if you want to hear more from Mark and hear more IR topics, let us know. Give us feedback, and we'll surely do that. If you want to talk to Mark more, and be, proactive and kind of meet some people on the IR team before you kind of need them and before it's kind of an emergency, you can find us at securit360.com. And of course, all of our content, podcasts, blogs, and all that fun stuff is on offsec.blog. Thank you very much for listening, and we will see you on the next episode.